I've been a fan of Weird Al Yankovic since I was a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I'm thinking it was probably my older brother who introduced him to our household, since he has always had a bit of an affinity for goofy novelty music and is arguably the biggest nerd in my family. Everybody in my family likes Weird Al to one extent or another. He's a thoroughly likable guy. I know several people who have met him, and they all say he's every bit as nice as he seems. Just a good dude, an exemplar of positive masculinity, what peak performance looks like. Personally, I think Weird Al Yankovic is a blessing to this messed up world. I have listened to most of Weird Al's catalog, so I'm acquainted with some of his lesser-known songs, such as Weasel Stomping Day from 2006, off the album Straight Outta Linwood. It's a short one, less than 2 minutes long, and rather than being a parody of a specific song, though its main melody is nearly identical to Trim Up the Tree from the Grinch animated special, it's one of Weird Al's stylistic parodies, which are much less popular than his parodies of, well, popular songs. I tend to like his stylistic parodies a lot. I think they're some of his smartest work, and they blend a bit more into satire than do his specific musical parodies. Weird Al is a parodist, not a satirist, but he certainly can do satire. He's smart enough. For those who aren't familiar or need a refresher, parody and satire are closely related things, but they're not quite the same. Parody derives humor from imitating a familiar work, while satire uses irony or exaggeration to make a point about society's faults. I find Weasel Stomping Day to be not just a parody, but also a work of satire, in a way that not a lot of Weird Al songs are. Weasel Stomping Day is a stylistic parody of mid-century American Christmas songs about a fictional holiday called, you guessed it, Weasel Stomping Day, which is about, you guessed it, stomping on weasels. Weasel Stomping Day is best understood with its accompanying music video, which was rendered in stop-motion animation by the team behind Robot Chicken. Though the musicality of the song is derivative of Trim Up the Tree from How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 1966, the stop-motion visual medium is clearly a reference to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from 1964, which was produced by Rankin Bass Animated Entertainment. The chipperness of the song is aggressive, which honestly encapsulates how I feel about a lot of Christmas songs. I've worked retail for years. I have opinions. In using aesthetics that we associate with Christmas, Weasel Stomping Day establishes that it's about a holiday that's considered normal and wholesome within the song's heightened version of reality. The video shows us Weasel Stomping Day yard decor, festive displays on public buildings, lessons about Weasel Stomping Day in school history classes, and the special boots used for the act of stomping. Everyone in town, including a guy from PETA apparently, is united around the tradition of stomping on weasels. There are other bizarre customs associated with the holiday, including wearing horned Viking helmets and spreading mayonnaise on the lawn. The lyrics go, "Why we do it, who can say?" But it's such a festive holiday. We see a montage of absurd cruelty to weasels, people in oversized boots stomping on the weasels until their guts fly out, turning the dial of cartoon violence well past Looney Tunes. The most on-the-nose line comes close to the end. It's tradition. That makes it okay. Some might insist that there's no deeper meaning to this song besides being a bit of shock humor mixed with aspects of nostalgia, which is a comedic formula that's proven pretty popular in the internet age, along with the fact that weasel is a funny word. Weird Al and Dave Barry apparently agree on that. I am of the opinion that there can be a lot to analyze even in some pretty goofy-looking things, and I enjoy exploring the depths. My 9th grade English teacher gave me the Still Waters Run Deep paper plate award at the end of the school year because she recognized that I was a deep thinker, so if that's not your thing, I'm not going to be the channel for you. A piece I read for one of my classes in college that has really helped me understand how to think about human cultural practices was Body Ritual Among the Nasarima, written by Horace Mitchell Minor and published in the journal American Anthropologist in 1956. It's a satirical paper that applies a deliberately exotifying lens to American cultural practices of the mid-1950s, describing mundane practices like the brushing of teeth in terms of ritual and superstition. It throws the reader off by spelling keywords backwards, including the word Nasarima in the title, which is an anadrome of American. This was meant to highlight the tendency in the field of anthropology to frame unfamiliar, especially tribal cultures, as strange curiosities, less rational beings than the anthropologists taking notes on them. This inversion of the anthropological gaze, applying a sense of distance to the audience's own culture, is extremely clever and thought-provoking, and it has really helped me treat all human cultures in a more value-neutral way. What do we Americans do that might be considered strange? Are there possibly some things that we do that are backward? What makes a practice backward? In what ways is every culture a bit of a curiosity? I'm going to tell you about an actual disturbing holiday tradition, not in the United States, but in a country in Eastern Europe, the Czech Republic. Ever heard of Easter whipping? In the Czech Republic, the day after Easter, it's tradition for boys and men to go around their village and spank girls and women with special decorated sticks, usually made from willow branches, and receive Easter eggs or alcohol in exchange, because being hit is something we should show gratitude for, apparently. Sometimes the girls get ambushed with cold water, too, which also sounds unpleasant to be on the receiving end of. This whole thing is believed to be some kind of spring fertility ritual of ancient origin. Artistic depictions and staged photographs make it look folksy and whimsical, like a playful game of tag, and maybe it is like that for some people, but there's variation in how severe the pursuing and hitting get. Some women, especially from more rural parts of the Czech Republic where old habits hang on the most, report that their experiences amounted to something like the purge, one day a year when men and boys were allowed, nay, encouraged, to chase women and girls down and beat them with sticks. I watched a great video from the creator Lucy L. called Why I Hate the Czech Easter Tradition that explains how awful Easter whipping can get from the perspective of a woman from the Czech Republic who received Easter whippings when she was a child. She and her mother experienced persistent knocks on the front door, smacks on the rear end, and drenching with cold water. Consent be damned. Just one day a year, they were told. Most disturbingly, according to Lucy L., sometimes it's drunk adult men tormenting girl children in this manner, and they get rewarded with more alcohol. She talks about how some people, mostly men, passionately defend Easter whipping because it's tradition that makes it okay, and insist that women who say they've been traumatized by it are complaining about nothing, ruining a bit of festive fun. Some people defend Easter whipping by saying it's not supposed to hurt. Never mind how often it does in fact hurt. And some women retort that they didn't feel hurt by it in their own experience, as if that negates the reality of others' experiences. In Lucy L's experience, it didn't really matter if girls wanted to participate, and boys were not taught to be gentle. I remember the bruises, she says. I remember the glint of joy some of the men and boys had on their faces when they did the deed, hitting a bit too hard. I remember some of the bastards carrying a juniper branch because they knew it hurt more. Not supposed to hurt, eh? This is an Easter tradition. Easter, which I associate with cute bunnies and pretty flowers. When I first learned about Easter whipping and how cruel it can get in some regions of the Czech Republic, the menfolk gathering around to beat girls with special sticks, I was reminded of Weasel Stomping Day. At its worst, the tradition can be quite similar to Weasel Stomping Day. Nonsensical mob violence wrapped up in a tradition that people have convinced themselves is wholesome. Why we do it, who can say? But it's such a festive holiday. It does appear that in some areas the Easter whip has evolved into something more like a decorative wand, and the practice of boys ambushing girls with cold water has evolved into more equal opportunity water gun fights, which shows how traditions can change to remove their more messed up elements. The other good news is that apparently, as of the beginning of this year, it is illegal in the Czech Republic for an adult to hit a child for any reason, so hopefully that means there will be less in the way of adult men hitting girl children on the butt the day after Easter. Maybe the Czech Republic is getting its act together. We can hope. The fact that Weasel Stomping Day is about cruelty to animals seems significant to me, considering that Weird Al has been a vegetarian since 1992. I'm sure he spent a fair bit of time thinking about the rather strange normalization of cruelty to specific kinds of animals in our society. Oh, Americans don't like open animal cruelty. They don't want to see factory farming and animal slaughter. That makes them uncomfortable. But boy, do they like eating meat. I've been more or less a vegetarian since I was 17, and I'm not here judging individual people for their choices because I'm not bold enough to claim that my specific lifestyle is the ethical ideal that everybody in the world should aspire to. My choices are about my own comfort level and what I'm able to do. But I think we should all do some actual contemplation about what we consume rather than doing the socially accepted thing of turning our brains off in order to not deal with the uncomfortable realities of what's considered normal. American culture has a lot of traditions that can be considered strange and backward. More than half of Americans think it's okay for adults to hit children when appropriate, when so-called corporal punishment is illegal in much of Europe and South America because the folks making decisions in those countries recognize that hitting another person is physical assault, even when the person being hit is a child. Americans routinely circumcise their sons, not really for any reason other than that some weirdos a century and a half ago thought it would prevent boys from committing the sin of apes, and now we're stuck with it as a social norm that parents pass on to their children. American public school students are expected to stand up every morning and recite in unison a swearing of their allegiance to a banner that represents their nation, which is so creepy. And the older I get, the more respect I have for that weird girl in my homeroom who refused to stand for it. I stood for the pledge in school because I wasn't ready to be that much of a nonconformer, but I did always skip saying the "under God" part because saying those words felt like vomiting in my mouth a little bit. I must also talk about how traditions can be wonderful. Sometimes the nonsense is the best part. I love a lot of the peculiar things humans do out of intergenerational habit. When strange traditions are not harmful, I think they're some of the most delightfully human things in the world. In Catalonia, which is a region within Spain, they have a tradition of including in Christmas nativity scenes a figure of a Catalonian peasant guy taking a dump on the ground. This mysterious man is known only as El Caganer, the pooper. Who is this man and why is he pooping near the baby Jesus? Nobody really knows. Whatever his origins, my guess is that he's stuck around because of the Frank Reynolds principle, and the Catholic Church tolerates a bit of nonsense because it's Christmas, although I'm sure they're casting their share of judgment. If the holiday described by Weird Al had nothing to do with weasel stomping and it were just put your Viking helmet on, spread that mayonnaise on the lawn day, the holiday wouldn't be any more explicable, but there would be nothing wrong with it from an ethical standpoint. It would be as good a reason as any for the stop-motion inhabitants of the town to have a holiday. Sure, why not put your Viking helmet on and spread that mayonnaise on the lawn? Enjoy the communal nonsense. We should always think a little bit about why we do things, though. If not, where does this tradition originate, which we can't always answer conclusively and isn't always a super relevant question. Why do we still do it is always a good question to ask, because then there's the follow-up question, should we still do it? Let's really reflect on why we continue to do the things we do. I'm a person who is forever asking why, much to the annoyance of some of the people around me. I'm really interested in the reasons for human behavior, especially some of the long-standing cultural stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of rational sense. Where do practices come from? Why do they persist? And should they persist? I guess that's what Weasel Stomping Day, the song, is asking us to think about. I believe Weird Al wanted to write a funny parody song, as is always his goal, and I believe in this case he also wanted to prompt his listeners to think about some of the cultural practices they might not have thought to question. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I hope you found this video worthwhile, and I hope you will stick around for the next one.